When you die from exposure, it means simply that the elements are going to kill you. That could be sun, that could be cold weather, that could be rain, it could be anything that's out in that natural environment in the form of weather. When you don't have a shelter or the proper clothing, you are essentially exposed to it. Whether it's your bare skin or improper footwear or even maybe a beanie not covering your head. Exposure will kill you fast.
A human body on the verge of death, half buried in the dirt like disposable garbage.
When I woke up, it was funny, all I could smell was the earth, dirt, and everything was black. And I remember I was laying on my arm.
No signs of civilization for miles, no food, shelter, or human contact, and no way out. The only option is to wait in isolation. But for how long? It is a scientific fact that survival is an instinct, and that is reflected in the way the mind and body works when there are few resources available. But what if a body's source of sustenance is immediately cut off? How long can it endure hunger, thirst, and loneliness? And most importantly, how can someone survive when they are left for dead in the middle of a desert?
You know, it's really amazing that no matter where you find yourself out in the bush, you can always find something that'll help you survive.
This is the astounding story of Ricky Megee, a survivor from Australia who braved 71 harsh days stranded in the Australian Outback, a feat which earned him the nickname, the Living Skeleton. In January 2006, 35-year-old Ricky Megee was all set to begin a new chapter of his career. He had received a government job offer from Port Hedland in Western Australia, and he decided to drive all the way there from his home in Queensland. It was a long road trip, but he had made the journey several times before in his Mitsubishi Challenger. Excited, he opted to go via the Bunteen Highway, which is situated within the vast expanse of the Australian Outback. That highway would soon become the road to hell for Ricky Megee. Ricky spotted an Aboriginal hitchhiker on his way and decided to help him by giving him a lift. On the way, the passenger passed Ricky a drink because he was feeling thirsty. That was when matters started to go awry. Ricky started feeling dazed while driving, due to the drink from the passenger being drugged. He struggled to stay conscious, but to no avail. Ricky blacked out at the mercy of his conniving passenger and fate itself. He woke up several hours later, feeling something sharp clawing at his limp, lifeless body. Everything seemed like a blur. His head was on fire, and moving a finger required every ounce of strength. He spotted 4 dogs eyeing him like dead prey. Mustering everything he could, he shooed the dingoes away. Ricky realized that he had been buried alive, covered in black plastic and left to rot. His shoes were gone, and he was wearing only a thin shirt and a pair of shorts. All he could see were the lifeless sands of the Tanami Desert. The passenger and his car were nowhere to be found, but for some reason he still had his car keys in his pocket. Despair, fear, anger. All of these emotions rushed through his head. How could this happen? What had he done to deserve this? Ricky braced himself for a test of endurance that he never signed up for, but looking back would do him no good. He had to fight for his survival. For the first 10 days, Ricky walked barefoot along the northeast corridor of the Tanami Desert, right in the heart of the Australian Outback, hoping to find help. The lack of vegetation and animal herds was a constant reminder to Ricky that he had to make use of the minimum to the maximum. In the daytime, temperatures soared up to 40 degrees in the day, and the lack of shelter meant Ricky had to endure sunburns on his skin, exacerbated by the dryness all around. Given the nature of the desert, the nights were equally as cold and treacherous, and Ricky had no clothes to keep himself warm. While this made walking barefoot even more difficult, the real fear was that of dehydration. In fact, during those first 10 days, Ricky often collapsed due to heat exhaustion, and his health started deteriorating. The other big problem was food. According to his accounts, Ricky survived by foraging everything from frogs to leeches, lizards, and dried plants. In an interview with ABC Radio, he said, "I ate the leeches raw, straight out of the dam. Grasshoppers, I just ate them. But the only thing I really sort of had to cook was the frogs. Let the sun dry them out a fair bit until they were a bit crispy, and then just ate them." Seasonally, the Tanami Desert was in its wet period, meaning that rain sometimes showed mercy from the boiling hot sun. That also meant Ricky could drink and store water, either from makeshift containers or from dams and waterholes. When water was not available, Ricky resorted to drinking his own urine by letting it cool overnight to dilute its pungent odor. He had no other choice. It was either that or suffering from dehydration. Minutes turned into hours. Hours turned into days, and days turned into weeks. Nobody knew there was a lone soul out in the Australian Outback, looking for help and on the brink of death. Initially, Ricky tried to survive by making temporary shelters from old tree branches, but that did little to protect him from the elements. Deep inside, he knew his body wouldn't be able to keep up with this routine of walking dozens of miles daily without any nutrition. He had to settle down and make the best of what was left in him. As luck would have it, Ricky found a broken-down windmill as he walked and decided to call this place home. He found a feed trough used for cattle herds, flipped it upside down to create a roof, and dug a hole in the ground. This became his bunker, a makeshift grave of sorts as death constantly loomed above his head. However, it was better than nothing. Although Ricky continued to salvage whatever nature threw at him, from droplets of rainwater to insects, lizards, and dry plants, he lost around half of his body weight and suffered from malnutrition and sunburnt skin. Walking itself became a nightmare, and he could not venture too far out from his home, otherwise he wouldn't make it back. The lack of oral hygiene also led to an abscess of the tooth, which he had to remove himself using his car keys. Given his bleak physical condition, it could have been fatal, but fortunately, Ricky managed to dodge that bullet. Psychologically, Ricky was in a very dark place. He had no one to talk to and very little to give him encouragement. He had traveled a very long distance in the hope of finding a passing car or traveler, but this had not paid off. His faith kept him strong, and he even made a cross out of 2 broken sticks, which he stuck on top of his shelter. It would be easy to assume that after all this time, Ricky got used to his scavenging routine, but every day was more difficult and more painful than the previous one. After 10 weeks of surviving like a nomad, Ricky was found by a group of local cattle herders in the whereabouts of the Burundudu cattle station. By that time, Ricky had become so emaciated that he was described as a walking skeleton by Mark Clifford, the manager of the cattle station. In his own words, he's walked for about 10 days to get to where he is before he's realized that he's got to set himself up some shelter and start trying to get some food into himself. He basically sat where he was for about 10 weeks. Ricky was quickly flown to Royal Darwin Hospital, and his case was reported to the police. After he was cleared of any suspicions of theft or drug abuse, Ricky spent 6 days recovering in the hospital, after which he was discharged. Thanks to the rainwater and him drinking his own urine, Ricky's body was not dehydrated and had managed to hold on despite being malnourished otherwise. Doctors were actually surprised at how quickly he recovered, despite his entire ribcage being visible, eyes sunken into the sockets, and legs being reduced to walking stilts. The story of the living skeleton made international news overnight, and Ricky was invited to several morning shows and radio interviews. Many people found his story inspiring, but some people were also doubtful about the authenticity of his claims. This was due to Ricky changing the details of his ambush with each retelling, and the astonishing pace at which he had recovered after being reduced to a bag of bones in complete isolation. For example, in later accounts, Ricky said that he had spotted 3 men stranded on the roadside instead of 1, and they were the ones who drugged him. Ultimately, though, Ricky Megee wrote a book about this incident titled Left for Dead, and moved to Dubai to work in construction and lead a normal life once again. What do you think about the man known as the living skeleton? Is it plausible he was drugged by a couple of nobodies, or was he trying to cover something up? Let us know in the comments below, and subscribe for more interesting and eventful realities.